designers have to have a broader background, a broader education. You ought to learn about economics. You ought to learn about finance. You ought to learn about businesses, but you also ought to learn more about people. You don't have to be an expert in this, but you have to know how to work with the people who are experts. Don't just learn about craftsmanship, which is what is taught today. When you get promoted in a company, it's not because you're a world's best circuit designer or whatever you do. It's because you've learned how to ask the broader questions that impact the company. And that's what I'm trying to have people do, not just in their jobs, not just in their work, but in their life.
Welcome to the Work for Humans podcast. This is Dart Lindsley. Human behavior is changing our planet, and the way we design products and systems has a direct impact on human behavior. The relationship between the two is worth exploring, as even the simplest behaviors, when added up, can affect our planet. That's according to Don Norman, who's lived multiple lives while studying everyday things and people. He's been a professor, industry executive, consultant, keynote speaker, author, electrical engineer, psychologist, cognitive scientist, computer scientist, and designer. He's the co-founder and principal of the user experience usability consulting firm, the Nielsen Norman Group, where he's now emeritus. Don's most well known, at least in my world, for his book, The Design of Everyday Things, and his second book, Emotional Design, both of which helped popularize many design concepts and are on the shelves of most designers. In this episode, Don and I discuss his upcoming book, Design for a Better World, in which he talks about how business leaders and designers can shift from a human-centered to a humanity-centered approach to design in order to grow thriving businesses and at the same time, a sustainable world economy. If you enjoy this episode, please remember to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Without further ado, my conversation with Don Norman. Welcome, Don Norman, to Work for Humans. I'm going to just tell you that, like many designers, your books, Design of Everyday Things and Emotional Design, introduced me to the discipline of design. Your upcoming book, however, is different. It's, I think, bigger. Design for a Better World, it's broader in scope, and I'm going to say it's about the designer's role in the future of humanity. How did you come to write this book?
I love that description because it's actually the reason I decided to write the book. I said, oh, well, I'm getting old. I'm 86 years old, and I'd like to do something in my remaining years that it actually has much greater impact. It's more important. That I know my books have been well received, but they're relatively about small things. How to make a better cell phone, how to make something that's easier to use, less errors. That's important. It really is, but it's not going to change the world. And I said, I'd let me step back about all the things I've done and all the experience I've had and put it together and say, what can I say that will really make a difference to the world? And the world is in crisis, all sorts of crises. Democracies all across the world are in crises. The right wing versus the left wing, again, all across the world, not just the United States, but all over. Economies are suffering. We have a new flu virus that keeps going and going and going and going, and people are not responding very well. And even though it was predicted, and everybody knew we would have this kind of a virus, nobody was ready for it when it came. And the other thing is the things that are happening in climate, with pollution. And the scientific community has been arguing about this for 20, 30 years, trying to notify the world and tell the world, and the world ignored it. And they're still mostly ignoring it. And I said, I want to address this because what am I an expert in, really? Well, I am trained as an engineer, which means I understand technology. I'm trained as a psychologist, which means I understand people. And I think the fundamental issue here is not a technological one. It's a human behavior one. And that's why I decided to write the book. And yes, I do intend this to be much broader, much more important, with a much wider audience.
So what's the difference between human-centered design and what you propose in this book, which is humanity-centered design?
You can't look at the meanings of the words. You have to look at the history, because the history of design is that it basically was developed in the 1700s, 1800s as a tool for manufacturing, along with the Industrial Revolution. The Wedgwood a pottery firm in England hired artists to paint their cups and saucers and so on. And they were making, well, ceramic ware for everyday people, not for the very rich and the royalty, but they wanted them to be fancy and etc. That was in some sense the beginning of design. But as design became more and more popular, it was really thought to be a way of making the devices more attractive and to increase the sales and profits of industry. And so up till recently, that's been the major focus of design. You work in industry and you help the companies be more successful. And designers always had a minor role. They're always in the middle. Nobody in academia knew where they belonged because, well, there's no theory. There's no underlying sense of scope. You're all craftspeople. That's not a university subject. And second of all, in the companies, they were at the middle level. They were thought this is the group we call upon. Then this new discipline, and I'll take some credit for this new discipline, which we called human-centered design, said, instead of focusing upon the appearance and the materials and the form of the devices you're designing, how about focusing on what people want to do with it? And so that was a revolution that happened in the 1980s. And yes, the psychology of everyday things and then the design of everyday things, same book, different title, helped usher that in. But nonetheless, it was still a tool of industry. Okay, quick, come back to today. We have to design for the ecosystem. We have to design for different cultures. We have to design for the indigenous tribes around the world. We have to design so that we don't destroy the world as we're making these wonderful devices. We have to design for everything, all living creatures and the also non-living, the world. And so the term humanity-centered design started maybe 20 years ago. I was able to trace it to some of my friends actually in an early paper. And I thought that was a good one, a good term, because it sort of emphasized we're looking for designing for all humanity. And when I design a new coffee cup, I mean, I should worry about where did the materials come from and what happens when I'm finished with it and I throw it away. What is its impact, especially if it's a paper or plastic cup? What's its impact? And it turns out that most paper cups cannot be recycled because paper is not very good for holding liquids, so it's coated with a thin layer of plastic, which is really, really difficult to take off. So that's what humanity-centered design is, simply emphasizing a much broader approach. When you make something, don't just make it as cheaply as you can make. Worry about where the materials came from and what it destroyed, how it destroyed the environment. Worry about the kinds of the pollution that your manufacturing process pours into the air or the streams or the land. And worry about what happens at the end of its life. How do you dispose of it? Better yet, there's something called the circular economy. What it is to reuse, recycle. Recycling is a bad thing because it doesn't really work. But to reuse in all the components so that there's no waste.
What are some examples of sort of escapers of the circular economy? So a circular economy would bring back products, for instance, to be reused, repaired, things like that. But there are things that are not in the circular economy today. We have basically an open circle in our economy.
It's not even a circle, it's linear. You extract, you manufacture, you use, and you discard. So trying to change things around is going to be very difficult. And companies are going to say it's going to cost us more money. And they're going to say, maybe we have to use different materials. And it makes us, economically non-competitive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so the book tries to address all of that. I have a color laser printer. Obviously, periodically, you have to buy a new toner. And I was really impressed. It's a Canon printer. And when I got a new toner from Canon, it's 4 colors, 3 colors in black and white. Well, just black, 3 colors in black. And it each comes in a little box. And you take it out and you shake it and you put it in. It's very simple. But they tell you, when you're all finished, take the old one and put it in the same box. And here's a QR code. Just photograph it and that'll give you a URL. And you print out the mailing label and just stick it over the box. And we will pick it up at no cost to you. And we've designed it so that our engineers will take it apart. We'll reuse all of the plastic. We'll reuse all of the metal pieces. We will reuse everything. Some of it will be for new laser cartridges, but some of it isn't any more suited for a new laser cartridge, but we have other uses that we can make of it. And even the used toner is actually has valuable fertilizer components and other things for the soil that we can sell to other people who will use it in an effective way. And so we have zero waste from this product.
This week I got Apple iPods that came in the mail, and the box that they come in, that's just the presentation box, weighed 155 grams. I weighed it. And it was this gorgeous single-use presentation layer to improve my unboxing experience. And not only that, it was an integrated box that had plastic and cardboard, so it was completely unrecyclable. And I thought to myself, I'll bet the person who built this box read emotional design, because emotionally, this thing was fantastic. But from a sustainability perspective, it wasn't doing a great job.
Yep. I used to ask people when I would give a lecture, I'd say, you buy lots of stuff and it comes in boxes or bags or so on. How many of you keep the boxes that it comes in? Basically, nobody raised their hand. When you buy a product from Apple, how many of you keep the box that it came in? Everybody raised their hand. They do a wonderful, brilliant job. But to your point, I don't want them to stop doing that wonderfully, emotionally exciting job. But, if you told them, let's see if we can reuse everything and make it so it's easy to recycle or maybe keep in your home for some other purpose, I bet you they could do it.
This is where I want this conversation to go, which is I can imagine achieving a circular economy through a kind of eco-authoritarianism where we do our very best to legislate everything. And on the other hand, I can imagine making it a lot more organic. And designers would play an incredible role in this. And so this is an odd question. But the way I think of a more organic, less authoritarian circular economy is the idea that we would create a trellis around which the circular economy could grow. And I don't know what that trellis is made of. I think to some extent it's made of how we train designers. It probably does have a legislative component to it, and it does have some rules. But if that question makes sense, what is the trellis around which we would grow a circular economy?
First of all, there's lots of design contests where people win prizes for their new packaging and for their new displays and their new this and that and the other. Suppose we change those design contests so that it wasn't just measured on how attractive it was or even how easy it was to use, but what its impact was on the world. And I personally think that wouldn't be hard to do because I suspect most designers are sensitive to this, and the people who run these big prizes probably could be convinced to change that. So that's one thing. Second thing, why do we need laws? The laws become, you're doing it because your law requires you. There's one really good, valuable point about the law that let's take a look at safety of the automobiles. The automobile companies didn't want to put in safety things like seat belts or the airbags or almost anything because it would add to the expense and the people don't want it. Nobody wants it. They want cheaper. And besides, even if I put it in, it would make my car more expensive and therefore less people would buy it. The virtue of a law requiring things like this is that it takes away that argument. It says, no, every company has to do the same thing. So you don't have any competitive disadvantage if you don't do it. But what's nice about it, it is a trellis. It was a supporting method for getting it going. But today, those laws aren't really required anymore because no company wants to be behind on the safety rule. They didn't want to talk about safety in the early days because they thought if we talked about safety, that implies our cars are not safe. And so that's what they resisted. But today, they all brag about all the new safety features. It will brake for you. It will tell you, beep, if there's a person behind you. It will do this. It will do that. So the laws got it going. They kickstarted it.
I think it's a great example. It's a great example of a law that basically took out the competitive disadvantage of doing the right thing. There's an interesting thing that I see in the book. There's kind of two kinds of designers that I can't tell if they're mentioned or if I conflate them. One kind of designer is the kind of designer who works on things that are a part of everyday life. So they're going to be working on consumer goods probably that actually interface directly with a human being. And there's another kind of designer who builds like turbines that go into dams. And I think your work on the design of everyday things and emotional design is very much on the side of where humans actually interact with the design and making sure that that's right. I think there's an incredibly important role for designers to play in humanity-centered design. And it takes a little bit of explanation about what I'm thinking, which is in order to attract consumers into a circular economy, we're going to need to make things that they are attracted to. And so an example is today, when I buy shampoo, I buy shampoo that has a pump and it's got a throwaway plastic container that it comes in. And I know I could do better from a sustainability perspective. If I could I should probably go and refill the bottle or something like that. But it's not convenient. I don't like it. It's messy. And so there's a way in which a designer, the kind of designer who is very focused on first-person experience, has the ability to draw people in to the circular economy by making it convenient. I get the sense in the book you're talking about all kinds of designers, which is you're talking about designers of social technical systems and everything.
Yes. Let me not forget the person who's the mechanical engineers, the electrical engineers, the other kind of civil engineers who design things that they say got nothing to do with people. Well, that's false, because big structures like buildings and bridges and stuff have to be put together by people. And you have to design it so that people can actually do that. And it's amazing how many bridges we have that are really in bad shape. And some of them can't be inspected to determine whether it's safe or not, because you can't see the big screw lug or nut, whatever it is, hidden behind all those concrete pillars, because they didn't design it so that people would get in and to see how good it was. Now, if you take a look at modern airplanes, because an airplane is an amazing thing, a commercial aviation, because these planes can last 40, 50 years in flight, and they're being maintained continually. And so when they do the design, they make sure that people can crawl through that space, that overhead space that's above your head, and you never notice it. Just above it, there's all these wires and pipes and so on. And people have to crawl through it in order to service it. Even the people who design turbines, somebody has to service it and install it. So all of this human behavior is required in almost everything. But why else do we build things? We build it in a sense for everything we build is for people, for society.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that component of design. For me, design is always about the design of first-person experience of consumers. And I think that's just a bias in my head. The idea that, well, in fact, you talk about it in the book about the artificial world and how everything around us is artificial. Somebody designed it. Somebody built it.
You want to know why we have so much trouble in auditoriums, or maybe even in our own homes, where the light switches aren't really where we need them, or you have 6 of them in a row and you don't remember which each one does and all of that. One of the reasons that you have bad design in these things is because it isn't a single person doing the design. And what happens is the architect designs the building, and then an interior part of the architecture firm designs the way the rooms are divided up. And then someone else, the lower level architects, ones in training, figure out where all the electric wires go and where all the plumbing goes and where everything goes. Then the people come in when you order 500 doors and you order a couple of thousand light switches, and the electricians come in and they install them. But they have no idea why it was designed that way or how the space is going to be used. They often try to do something intelligent, but they can't. They don't have enough information. And so there are lots of reasons. Lots of people love to have these photographs of, isn't this stupid the way this was designed? Or here's a staircase that ends up in empty air and doesn't go anyplace, et cetera, et cetera. And it isn't because people were stupid when they designed it. It's because there was no communication among the components. And quite often the last person who has to do this really stupid thing will be saying under his breath, this is the stupidest thing I've ever been asked to do, but what can I do? I'm going to do it like they told me to do it.
I got to say, there's a couple of different things that make me despair about the future of the circular economy. And that's one of them, which is the way that the problem can get sort of moved around as a lump under the carpet, as opposed to really being cornered and resolved because of how all the pieces are working together.
You have to understand systems, and you have to design for the system, and it has to be created as a system where the different disciplines are all together as a team. So the electrical people are actually making talk with the architects and decide that, putting with those wires there, or you know what, we don't need to have wires anymore. We can put the switch any place you like because we don't need to have wires. We have this new technology. It's called wireless, et cetera, et cetera. I was just talking to an architect. We're talking about the way the buildings are being built today so that you ignore whether you're in a hot, sunny place or you're in a cold, sunny place. You put lots of windows in, you make it open, you do all this because, hell, our heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems are so good, it doesn't matter what temperature it is. And it doesn't matter that we're using the air conditioner all the time. Whereas we could have actually built the building where it wouldn't have required an air conditioner. There's something called air towers that automatically move the air up and down in the proper way. And he said yes, and he showed me pictures of what the Mayan Indians used to build and how they never had air conditioning, but their homes were quite comfortable. And I've seen this in different communities all around the world. And he said, but I can't build that way. The laws don't allow me to. They have all sorts of requirements that they really hamper my ability to take advantage of nature. And so it's a complex system that we live in. And we have to realize it is a system. We can't just do something in isolation because then you get no collaboration or communication. And things can be made worse simply because everybody has to do the best they can with no knowledge. We need system thinking.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's also an example of legislating for a linear economy, which is that we've actually built rules that make that inevitable. I want to get to the question of work. And so, as you know, the theory behind this podcast, the philosophy behind this podcast is that work is actually a product, that it's something that can be designed and should be designed for humans, and that humans want more than money from their work. They want a large range of things. And so I want to do an experiment on the idea of if we were going to design that product to be sustainable, what that would look like. I have one idea. I have a couple of ideas, but I'm interested, in that question.
I assumed that you were about to go into the discussion of the nature of work and why is it that most people hate their work.
We could do that too.
And part of that is because there's a philosophy that the academics love to call modernism and modernity. It started probably in the late 1700s, but mostly the 1800s and early up to the mid 1900s, that science leads progress. Science invents and technologies make and people adapt. So there were lots of people who studied work and they made it more efficient. And this time motion studies made actually your work much more efficient and many ways easier to do, except that it was used to speed up the number of items that a given person could use. In the classic Charlie Chaplin movie of working in an assembly line, where all you do the whole day is you do the same operation over and over and over again. That is really efficient until you burn out the people. Nobody ever sat down and said, how can we design work in a way that people will feel like they've had a say in the matter, that they feel they are contributing something, they feel proud of the work they do. And would it be less efficient? Well, you mean in terms of I might turn out slightly less numbers of items per day? Yeah, that's true. But I bet you it's going to be more efficient overall because they're not going to quit in disgust or get injury or get sick or call in sick. But people are just starting to realize that. And the pandemic has helped for the first time that people realize not everybody, but that's upon your job. But, I don't have to go into work. I can do the work just as well from home. In fact, even better because I'm not being interrupted all the time, etc. Because of the factory, we separated private life from business life. So you spend more time in business than you do with your family. And then because of the communication mechanisms today, your bosses don't think anything of calling you over the weekend and ask you to do something. And personally, to my feeling is that's okay. I don't mind if you do that. However, that means I can go in the middle of the workday, I can go off and go, watch a movie, go enjoy myself, have a good meal, do my shopping, whatever. That the arbitrary distinction between work and family, well, let's add more flexibility on both sides.
One of the things that you talk about in the book is the socio-technical systems the behaviors that we have built around our technology. And I was thinking about this question of work. One of those is the 8-hour day. And in particular, especially with the heat wave going through the country right now, going through the world really right now, in hot parts of the world, there's a siesta. You don't need all that air conditioning because you lie in a hammock and you drink a sangria for 3 or 4 hours when you can't work in the day, and then you work later in the night. And that's something that it seems to me that the industrial North has exported to the world, which is this 8-hour day right in the middle of the day.
If you've ever been in Singapore, which is located right on the equator, so it's hot every day of the year, they don't take siestas because they live in a modernistic world where everything is air conditioned. Your apartment is air conditioned, your building is air conditioned, your car is air conditioned, the buses are air conditioned, and there's only a brief few seconds when you transition from one to the next. But even that they're trying to eliminate because they have tunnels between the buildings. In Minneapolis, they have tunnels and walkways to prevent you from the cold, and in Singapore, they have them to prevent you from the heat. And that's crazy. So nobody ever goes outside.
It's interesting. I wonder if I have this quote right next to me. It's the quote from the Chicago 1933 International Exposition that's in your book. Science discovers, genius invents, industry applies, and man adapts. Individuals, groups, entire races of men fall into step with the slow or the swift movement of the march of science and industry. Such a high modernist approach. And it very much goes to the idea that essentially the technology of work or the social technology of work exactly is something that we have all been fitted to as opposed to it being fitted to us.
And the real problem is because it's been around for so long, people are born into this, and therefore they think it's natural in the way things ought to be. They don't realize it's artificial and not always essential. It is true there are some things where people have to be in the same place at the same time. I mean, you can't have a hospital where people can take off or not show up. And assembly lines, well, I think we can actually get rid of assembly lines or most of it.
Yeah. You know where I want to go next? This is a question I often save till the end, but I think it'll open up a window, which is this. I've asked lots of people this question, hundreds of people this question, which is what job do you hire your job to do for you? And I would love to ask you that question and feel free to critique the methodology as well.
It's interesting because I read your blogs and writings and other people's answers to those questions. And the first thing that always occurs to me and still occurs to me is every time I hear the question, I say, what? I don't understand the question. I can't parse it, which maybe is why you get such interesting responses. But, I love my work. What does my work do to me? It excites me, it informs me, it engages me, and it teaches me. I learn so much when I do my work. And I've been lucky because I've been mostly, not entirely, but mostly in the academic world. And, if you have to prepare lectures for your course, you learn a lot by trying to prepare what you're going to teach the people this time. Then your students have problems and you try to figure out why they have a problem. Oh, maybe I'm not explaining it very well. And I love it when students interrupt me and tell me that I'm wrong. And that's how I learn. And it's just academia, it turns out, it has all of its negatives, by the way. It's a horrible bureaucracy and people get promoted for the wrong reasons. And you worry a lot about your status and your ego and all this crap. But it also gives you the ability to do things that you care about that might make a real difference. And even when I worked in industry, it was the same thing. I was really trying to make life better for not just the people who bought the products, but also the people making the products and designing the products.
Yeah, it's interesting. You have, I think, if we look at work as a product, you've bought a variety of that product. You had a really interesting career where you moved from academia to industry, industry to academia, back and forth, retired, unretired. And I would assume, especially when you moved from industry back to academia, that you got paid less. And I assume that just because I know how academia is paid, which is not bad, actually, pretty darn well. But what it shows is that you were looking for something in this product, which is work, which was a lot more specific to you and a lot broader than the pay.
Well, I've always been interested and curious in everything. And when I got my job at Apple, I said, "Oh, I'm an expert of this," and I had just finished this book called. It was called originally "The Psychology of Everyday Things," and I could use it. And I had my former students. Some of them worked at Apple, and we were developing the Apple user interface manual was written by my former students before I got to Apple. But I discovered that a lot of what I knew was useless, and a lot of the important questions that people would ask me, I couldn't answer. And what that really did is it made me realize that going back and forth between academics and industry was wonderful because industry would point out what the real questions were that would matter. And I could take that back to the academy and try to understand now what is going on here. Because otherwise, look, most university professors have never worked in a company. And they don't know what the real world is like. And so they like to study the real world, but they don't understand the world. And they make up artificial worlds to study which don't have any relationship to the real world. And so going back and forth is really valuable. It grounds you.
And helps you find better questions.
It helps you find much better questions. But let me tell you, every time I switch fields and do something differently, the existing people often hated it. And I've been called all sorts of names. And when the book, The Psychology of Everyday Things, was first published, it got a review in the New York Times Book Review in which I was told, which said this was a really stupid book and there's nothing in here of any interest to anybody. And I don't know why they even bothered to publish it. So I've had these interesting experiences where, and now, I was doing revolutionary stuff and I know I succeeded because now when people discover who I am and what I did, they said, wow, that's so old fashioned.
That's fascinating. If you continue to be novel, you haven't made the impact you hoped.
That's right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Here's a different question. What does your work cost you?
Well, all work has its negative sides, and there's no job that's 100% perfect. So let me ignore that. I'll tell you, I think what the job has cost is not me. It's cost my family.
Mm-hmm.
Because to be successful, I used to say to be successful in academia, you have to you do this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Weekends? Oh, that's when you can get more work done because there aren't any meetings, et cetera, et cetera. But after I've been in industry for a while, I discover it's the very same thing with the leaders in industry. As you move up the chain of command, if you will, and of deeper responsibility, your life is dominated by it. And you discover lots of books written about the life and novels and plays about how the senior executive is always on the phone and never talks to his family and is always interrupted, et cetera, et cetera. And so fortunately, I had a family that I have to be careful what I say because they will listen and say, come on, Don, what are you talking about? But yes, I had a family that allowed me to do this.
Yeah, and it's funny because a lot of people go to work to make money to take care of their family. And like with a lot of products, there's a trade-off between features. I can get a car that has four-wheel drive, or I can get a car that gets great mileage. It's hard to get both. And so there's almost an antagonistic quality to some of the features we want from our work, and it can come at the cost of other things that we want from our work.
Well, one of the things that has helped me is that because I am studying everyday things and everyday people and things that really impact people who live, my family could share in it. I wasn't doing something that was so exotic they couldn't understand. So my family have also helped me write the books and to critique my books, which is much more valuable to me. And that has helped. I've been lucky that people can understand the kind of work I do. They often can't understand why I do it because they say, you're just doing common sense. And I say, that's right. But common sense is rare.
Right. Especially evidence-based common sense. That's a tricky thing to bring together. I've known mathematicians who are married and couldn't talk to each other about their work. Neither one could understand the other's work. They're both faculty in math.
Mathematics is one of the worst fields in that sense that the work is so esoteric that the different mathematicians in the same department often do not understand each other. And that makes it very difficult for them to evaluate their own faculty.
Oh, yeah, right. Good point. Well, they can have algorithms do that probably. So then the question is, coming from that, if I were trying to attract designers to work that is in support of a circular economy, of a sustainable future, the reason I hesitate to say this is because it's not clear to me that you are actually a designer. In other words, there's a part of what you do, which is it's science. It's it's a discovery approach. But you still might be able to say something about what designers are looking for and how we might attract them to building this sustainable economy.
Yeah, well, people ask me, what have I designed? Because if you're not if you're a designer, I should be able to pick up an object and say, I designed this. No, I can't. But what I design is new ideas and approaches. And one of the fields I helped inspire and worked in, which is what the design of everyday things is about, is it's a field called interaction design. And it allows people to design things that other people can understand and use. So yeah, there are a wide variety of different designers. Not everybody designs a physical product.
It's very true.
Designers love to solve problems. Actually, designers are not good at solving problems so much as they are good at finding the problem in the first place and discovering what the real issue is beneath it that they can then work on. And so in my classes, what I used to do is have people go out and find the problems in the world and come back and talk about them. They had to say why it was a problem. How did you think this developed? Because let's assume the people who created whatever you took a picture of or want to talk about was intelligent. So how did it happen this way? Because actually, when you start to understand how it happened, you may discover, well, it was this lack of communication, or that maybe when I tell them, try to figure out how to make it better, they say, they give up and they say, well, come to think of it, I can't think of any better way of doing it. But people love that, I think. They like trying to think of the world that way.
Totally agree.
When I wrote this book, I just said, I usually take my books and I teach it in class because then the students tell me what's wrong and what they can't understand and so on. But when I taught this book, this new book, The Design for a Better World, I've never had such exciting students. They got it. And they kept saying, we love this course. For the first time, I can see where I can make a difference in the world. But then they would ask me questions like, where can I get a job doing this? And I wouldn't know. But where can I go and study more about this? What universities in the world are teaching this? I wouldn't know. It was so much so that they wanted me to teach another course afterwards. The next quarter, a number of the ones who took that next course didn't even register for it. They didn't even get course credit. In fact, a couple had graduated and had jobs and they took the course anyway. And I couldn't believe it. That's a demonstration that they really cared and thought this was the first time they could actually make a difference in the world. Now, the designers can't create the circular economy because that's an economic issue. It's a material science issue. It requires an understanding of ecology. It requires a systems approach within your company. And as long as designers are at the low levels of the company, they can't make that happen. So one thing I've been advocating for is designers have to have a broader background, a broader education. You ought to learn about economics. You ought to learn about finance. You ought to learn about businesses, but you also ought to learn more about people. Don't just learn about craftsmanship, which is what is taught today. You have to learn about the humanities, which is where you actually learn about life. The people who know most about people are not the psychologists, it's the novelist.
Yeah. And you can tell because you can look back pre-technology and you can still see that the playwrights are nailing it. In my organization, we have a certification, and it's called Process Designer Certification. And it includes process improvement, which is a very third-person kind of approach to problems. It's like God's eye view to problems. We're going to get up, we're going to look at a cause and effect map, we're going to figure out how to solve it. And it includes design. And because you need to be able to do that third-person view, but then you need to be able to get into the experience of every stakeholder that's in that system and understand how they're going to interact with that system. And so I don't know if it's one person. I don't know if it's just designers or if it's a very close partnership between business architects, process designers, experienced designers, and it could be one person, but it could be a team.
What you said is absolutely true, but I want to expand it because you talked about how different disciplines of design have trouble working with each other and coordinating. But you have to also be able to work with the engineers, with the MBA folks, the business people, with the finance people, and with politicians. Because anything that's big and important is going to be a political issue. You don't have to be an expert in this, but you have to know how to work with the people who are experts. And that's what makes a person a leader. when you get promoted in a company, it's not because you're a world's best circuit designer or designer or whatever you do. It's because you've learned how to ask the broader questions that impact the company. And that's what I'm trying to have people do, not just in their jobs, not just in their work, but in their life.
Yeah. The future of humanity needs Renaissance people.
Nobody wants to hire a Renaissance person or promote them. What are you really good at? You're supposed to name one thing.
Right. And it has to do with the legibility of resumes to some extent. How do I come across as a thing, not a diversity of things? So actually, by the way, that's actually an answer to one of the questions of how do you attract the right kind of designer to sustainability. And it's being willing to hire the kind of broad individual who is not a specialist, but is more of a generalist.
Yeah. By the way, not everybody should be a generalist. We do need specialists. We need the deep, detailed knowledge. So that's why we need to have a group of people who bring together all the different aspects.
I really appreciate the conversation today. Anybody who is reading this book, it makes you reflect completely differently on almost every decision you make during the day, which has been a strange experience. Mostly books don't make me do that, but every product I bought, every design decision I made, it does make you reflect differently and think more broadly. So I got to tell you, for somebody who's read it seriously and really thought about it, it does make a difference.
Well, that's very nice to hear because I don't trust my students because I'm a professor and they're students and they may be making me feel good. And I haven't had very many other people read it. And it's not going to come out until March. It takes forever to get books published today. But yeah, so thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for your time today. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Work for Humans. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. And share the show with one person you think would get value from it. Believe it or not, this really helps us grow the show and reach more people who want to build the kind of work that people really want. As always, thank you to my producer, Jason Ames at Ninth Path Audio for his insights into content and his high standard for quality. Final note, the opinions shared here are my own and not the views of Google or Cisco Systems. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.